Welcome to the second in my four-part series on the chorale settings of Johann Sebastian Bach. This week, we're going to look at the chorale Herzliebster Jesu, was hast du verbrochen? This chorale is rather short, but it is a memorable piece, packing into its modest duration a story of extraordinary expressive potency that never fails to move me deeply. Bach set this piece twice in the St. John Passion of 1724, and again 3 years later in the St. Matthew Passion, where it appears 3 times, and every time with notably different harmonizations. The poem from which the words are taken is a Lutheran Passion hymn written in 1630 by Johann Hermann, about 100 years before Bach first used it in the St. John Passion. In each of his 5 different settings of the melody, Bach has chosen a different verse out of the original 15. In the St. Matthew Passion, Bach sets the first and fourth verses. So I'm going to read the original German text, followed by an English translation. Herzliebster Jesu, was hast du verbrochen, dass man ein solch scharf Urteil hat gesprochen? Was ist die Schuld, in was für Missetaten bist du geraten? O dearest Jesus, what law hast thou broken, that such sharp sentence should on thee be spoken? Of what great crime hast thou to make confession? What dark transgression? Bach was aware of the enormous challenge that such a lengthy passion setting would pose for contemporary audiences, and he went to great pains to ensure that the intensely dramatic nature of the passion story would hit the listeners viscerally. So the individual movements of this colossal work are shot through with dramatic touches that make direct hits on the listener's emotional nerve centers, and this chorale is no exception. Pay special attention to the harmony, the chord spacing, and the use of vocal register on keywords such as Schuld, or guilt, verbrochen, or broken, or Missetaten, or misdeeds, and so on. So first, I'll play the unaccompanied melody, followed by Bach's complete 4-part setting. So to begin with, let's look at Bach's role in setting this piece. You might say that his compositional intervention is minimal since he composed neither the melody nor the words and merely adding 3 additional voices. However, he had to make a number of crucial decisions right at the outset. Perhaps the most consequential decision is that of the key and therefore of register for the voices. In the case of both of the standalone St. Matthew Passion settings, Bach has chosen the key of B minor, which puts the sopranos into a fairly high range, stretching up to the G above the treble staff. So that might not seem like a big deal, but it's actually fairly rare that Bach takes his soprano parts that high in his chorale settings. The result is a moment of particular intensity on the words ein solch hart Urteil, such a hard sentence. So again, this is fairly rare. Most of the time, Bach keeps his soprano parts in the chorales to within the treble staff. Beyond questions of key, Bach also frequently illustrates the poetic ideas in his texts by means of musical figuralisms in the remaining voices, but we'll set that aside for now. All of this is lost on the student if the text is not read and the piece is presented as an abstract piano piece, as all too often happens. So once Bach has settled upon a key, he has to choose the tonality of the cadences at the end of the phrases. And this, of course, has profound consequences for the emotional tenor of the setting. So let's take this phrase here at the words "Was ist die Schuld in was für Missetaten?" So in his first setting of this chorale, Bach ends this phrase on a dominant seventh chord in first inversion, which is a fairly dissonant chord. And what's more, he illustrates musically the imagined misdeeds of Christ with this vertiginously descending bass line on the word missetaten, or misdeeds. You'll also notice the characteristic and strategic use of that dissonant tritone interval from E to A sharp at the end of the phrase, further compounding this idea of a fall from grace. However, the melody could, of course, have been set in a completely different way. So let's have a look at what he does with the fourth verse of the chorale from the St. Matthew Passion. So I'm going to, again, read the words in German and then in English. Wie wunderbarlich ist doch diese Strafe. Der gute Hirte leidet für die Schafe. Die Schuld bezahlt der Herr, der Gerechte, für seine Knechte. What punishment so strange is suffered yonder? The shepherd dies for sheep that loved to wander. The master pays the debt his servants owe him, who would not know him. So here at the words Herr, der Gerechte, Bach instead gives us a plagal cadence in B major. So why the change? Well, it has to do with the text, of course. The words here have a decidedly different emotional tenor. The idea that the master is paying the debt of those who do not even know him is a much more uplifting idea than the musical illustration of the much more torturous concept of misdeeds in the previous setting. Similarly, let's look at how very differently Bach harmonizes the opening phrase of verses 1 and 4. In verse 4, we have a chromatically ascending bass line at the word wunderbarlich, or strange. This is, of course, another musical figuralism. Let's hear that bass line. Quite often in this chorale, Bach takes advantage of the comparatively high soprano line to indulge in some rather unorthodox and extremely wide spacings. Bear in mind that if the soprano part is quite low, then of course most of the time your only option is close spacing, as there simply isn't room in the lower voices to accommodate larger intervals. Let's look at the fourth beat of bar 9, for example, where Bach breaks the rule that is so often taught to students of not having more than an octave between two adjacent voices, except between the tenor and bass. I can't even play that at the keyboard without having to roll the chord. It's just so widely spaced. In this instance, there is a remarkable interval of a tenth between the soprano and the alto, and an octave between the tenor and the bass, meaning that the entire chord covers a range of 2 octaves and a third, which is quite remarkable. So why does Bach do that? Well, let's look at the shape of the complete line from the first tone all the way to the final cadence. So here we have a huge wedge shape with the soprano and bass in contrary motion, and the alto and tenor moving mostly in thirds and sixths downwards. This gives the music an intensity that it would not otherwise have had, but in order to get there, he has to start with an extraordinarily wide spaced chord. So as ever, thank you for watching, and if you have a favorite Bach chorale, please let me know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.